What's up, everyone? Welcome to this week's edition of Ask Shane Anything right here on SIFTD Games at SIFTD.net. I'm Shane Satterfield. I've been covering the games industry for almost 30 years professionally at this point, and I'm here to answer all your questions, not just about the games industry. I'll answer questions about anything, but here's the thing. I gotta have questions to answer, and this week, we didn't really get any. So I only have 2 questions to answer in this week's edition of the show. It's gonna be shorter. We can't do it without you guys, so head on over to SIFTD.net. There in the header, there's a link to go to our forums to ask me questions. Again, you can ask me about anything. Mostly nothing's off limits, for the most part anyway. But again, we're gonna have a much shorter episode today. There's nothing I can do about it if we don't have questions, so get on over there and ask them. This show happens because a lot of you guys and girls are pledging at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/SIFTD. That's the Ask Shane tier. Y'all guys love the show, you pay for the show, but you gotta ask questions if you want to see the show continue. Alright, our first question this week comes from Vincent. What do you think of the various flavors of Nintendo Directs? Are you disappointed today's Direct is a partner Direct rather than a full showcase with first parties? How does that square with the world where third-party games like Call of Duty and Elden Ring are some of the biggest games? Well, Vincent, I am an equal opportunity viewer. I am totally cool with all the different permutations and combinations of Nintendo Directs. It's not about like whether it's first party or third party or hardware focused or whatever. It's about the content of the actual Directs. You could have an awful first party Direct. You could have a great first party Direct. You can have an awful third party Direct. You can have a great third party Direct. So it's not really about what it is. It's what's in the show that matters. So let's take a look at today's Nintendo Direct. And generally, it appears that the opinion on the internet is very negative. It's really funny to me that most publications will run a story about Hollow Knight Silksong after every event. Oh, the Hollow Knight Silksong fans are beside themselves. They're jumping off a bridge. They're... Is that news? It's not news. Anyway, no, so there was no Hollow Knight Silksong, just so you know. It looks like most people were pretty disappointed. And to be fair, this felt more like a Square Enix press event than a Nintendo press event. I mean, it had, 3 games in it or something like that? I mean, I'll say this. If you go rewind back to the N64 era, where it seemed like Square Enix would never work with Nintendo again. And then we got Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the GameCube, and everybody's like, oh my god, Square Enix came back, or whatever. And then Square Enix basically just gave Nintendo scraps for the next decade plus. So it's good to see Square Enix back on board with Nintendo. Pretty much everything Square Enix does is released on Nintendo consoles at this point. That wasn't the case for a really long time, so that's cool and all. But they were a kind of obscure Japanese RPGs that we really like. People who go to SIFTD every day, people who are big-time fans of games love. But the casual person who's trying to figure out right now whether they should buy a Switch 2 or not, I don't think Octopath Traveler 0 is really going to bump them up over the edge to buy a Switch 2. To your point, though, you're right. Third-party games are a lot of times the best-selling games in the industry, mostly because we just don't get first-party games as often as we used to. They're the best-selling games, but here's the thing, you can't just say, oh, Cyberpunk 2077 has sold 28 million copies, so shouldn't that be a big deal? No, and that's because it has sold 28 million copies, because people have already played it. Everybody's already played it. It's not that people are down on a third-party Nintendo Direct. They're down on a third-party Nintendo Direct where all the games that are shown have already been released for other platforms, and the ones that aren't all that exciting. From Software is working on a Switch 2 exclusive right now called Dusk Brothers or something like that. I can't even remember the name of it. That should tell you all you need to know. I bet you if you talk to the layman, the person who's going to buy the 100 million Switch 2s, not the hardcore Nintendo fans, they have no idea that game even exists. So why wasn't it in the thing today? That's the one thing I actually thought to bring up, and it wasn't in the Direct today. So it's not, what you're getting at is well, they're third-party games, and they sell really well, so people should be just as excited for those as they are. No, they're old games for the most part, and again, the new games that were announced today are not all that particularly exciting, or really that kind of big games. It felt like Square Enix's B team showed up for the Direct today. Where was, the third Final Fantasy VII remake? Why can't that debut in a Nintendo Direct? Why does it have to be given a PlayStation? Why? So I think that's what people are pissed off about. They're pissed off about the fact that, like, if you're a Nintendo fan, you've been getting scraps from third parties for a really long time. Meaning, like, whatever we can get to run on the hardware, like a year and a half after it came out on PlayStation or Xbox. And I think what people are starting to figure out is, like, it's probably going to continue with Switch 2. Now, I will say this, Kronos was announced today for Switch 2, and it looks like it's basically coming day and date with the other platforms. That is, look, I realize you may not care about Kronos, whatever. It's Bloober Team's new game. I think it actually looks pretty awesome. But you may not care about it, but what matters is that it's a pretty big third-party game that's coming to Switch 2 basically day and date with all the other platforms. That's what Nintendo needs to focus on. Not getting a bunch of old raggedy games, and this is going to happen. We're going to get a ton of ports from PS4 and stuff like that for Switch 2. You can do both. You can get those old games on the platform to satisfy long-term Nintendo fans who only buy Nintendo platforms. You can also get the new stuff. So, look, Nintendo's not stupid. I'm sure it's working on all this stuff, but you have to convince the publishers and the developers to work on this creakier platform. Again, I've talked about this before and Ask Shane Anything, but, you know, the fact that there's the Xbox Series S out there the developers are working for, that is a boon to Nintendo Switch 2 because they're basically on the same footing. So if you're a developer, you're incentivized now to make that Xbox Series S version where in the past you kind of hated it. Now you may make more money off of that weaker version because it also goes on Switch 2. So I don't think that it's like people like or dislike the directs based upon whether it's first party or third party. Though most people obviously want to check out Nintendo's first party games because they're some of the best in the industry and they usually don't swing and miss all that often. But the truth of the matter is, it's not about whether it's first party or third party, it's about the actual games and products that are in the direct. Okay, our second and last question. This is the only episode we've ever done with 2 questions of Ask Shane Anything. Anyway, here's our last question. This one comes from Kevin. Sony just purchased 2.5% of Bandai Namco. We have previously seen Sony purchase similar amounts of Kadokawa and Epic. Why is Sony purchasing these tiny percentages? What will it gain by owning 2.5% of Bandai Namco? Well, the first thing I'm going to say, Kevin, here is that one size does not fit all when you're talking about these purchases of equity in these companies by Sony/PlayStation. They're all for different reasons. So the Kadokawa, well, not all of them, but the Kadokawa thing was definitely for a different reason. It has PlayStation, Sony really, has its own sort of anime manga thing that it's doing, and it wanted to sign a deal with Kadokawa, so it creates a pipeline between all the anime and manga studios that it works with and its service. So that makes sense, but you say, well, they only bought a small percentage, why does it matter? It sounds like a small percentage, but when you actually look at the dollar amount that was spent, it's a lot. And so they are hoping, PlayStation, it is hoping, that it can buy a little bit of Kadokawa, and then that engenders Kadokawa to start working more closely with PlayStation to start basically creating a pipeline between Kadokawa and PlayStation/Sony's anime manga product. That's that one. Now the other ones where they just purchased 2.5% in Epic Games and Fortnite, or 2.5% in Bandai Namco or whatever, that's all influence. And again, these are small percentages, but not small dollar amounts. I mean, you got to figure even 1% of Epic at this point is a lot of freaking money. So it sounds like a small investment, but it's not. It's big time dollars. So basically what PlayStation is doing is trying to create influence inside these publishers. More than any of the 3, I would argue, PlayStation relies on third-party publishers. So Xbox, its first-party stables are rocking right now. It has Game Pass. Nintendo's first-party studios, at least in the Switch era, every month, 1 or 2 big games, month after month after month. That's not the case at PlayStation. PlayStation had 2 big first-party exclusives this year, and that's it. So you have another 10 months there that you need to fill. You have to fill that with third-party games. So third-party games are more important to PlayStation than any of the big 3. There's no doubt about that. And when it invests a little bit of money, or at least on a percentage basis, into these publishers. It's basically saying like, hey, like, let's work on some exclusives together. Like, we're kind of on the same team here. We both are incentivized to make sure that you do well. And that's the message that PlayStation is sending to these publishers when it decides to invest in them. This is a symbiotic relationship where we're both going to benefit. So let's work together. And it works. I mean, you get most third-party platform exclusives have been PlayStation exclusives. Now, I'll say this. It does feel like the tide is turning. Obviously, Final Fantasy 16, PlayStation 5 exclusive. Square Enix was giving everything to PlayStation for a long time there, and it's now changed and said, nope, we're going multi-platform with all our games going forward. So it does feel like that's slipping away a little bit from PlayStation, which may be why it has started investing in these publishers to be like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, we need this relationship to work out for us to survive. So that's what I think. I don't know 1,000%, but having worked in the industry for a long time and seen a lot of stuff come and go, that would be my guess. PlayStation is basically buttering the palms of these publishers saying, hey, you know, we'll invest $500 million into your business, but we don't do that for free. And it may be a nod and a wink, but ultimately it probably will pay dividends, even though a lot of publishers at this point are trying to get away from doing platform exclusives at launch. So PlayStation, I think, is just trying to hold on to the business model that it's prospered within for the last 20 or 30 years. I think it's starting to see it slip away, and so it's investing to try to keep that from happening. Okay, that's it for this very short edition of Ask Shane Anything. It'll be a short edit, that's for sure. Thanks to everybody who's pledging at that Ask Shane tier at $7 or more per month at patreon.com/sifted. That is truly why, even when we only have 2 questions, this show still happens, because you guys love it and you support it with your money, and I appreciate it very much. But look, I appreciate everybody who gives us anything, even if it's just a like or a subscribe on YouTube, or you're sharing the show on social media. All that stuff matters. I appreciate all of it. It definitely makes a difference. So anyway, we'll be back next Thursday with another edition of Ask Shane Anything. And always remember, sleep is for the dead. Play games instead.